My guest today is Matt Soucoup. Matt, how you doing?
Well, David.
Do you
well.
like Matt or Matthew?
Matt's perfect.
All right. Matt's perfect.
Matt's perfect.
It's good. You should put that on your license
plate. Wear it on my badge, yeah.
What do you do, Matt?
I'm a software developer. I have my own company called Code Mill Technologies.
Uh-huh.
So contracting work, consulting work.
What kind of contracting do you? You're writing code, right?
I'm writing code.
Is it? You do a lot of mobile stuff.
I do a lot of mobile stuff. Xamarin work mainly. Do a little web work on the side, but it's mainly Xamarin work. That's where my passion
Let's talk about
is.
Xamarin, because I'm actually learning Xamarin now. I'm going through the Xamarin University classes and certification and all that stuff.
Wonderful.
I'm a noob. I'm totally a noob. But you're not.
No, I had the Xamarin certification right away after Xamarin University opened. I signed up for university right away, and it's a great product. I'm really thrilled with what they do. They keep on releasing new classes, and I think it's great.
What's new in Xamarin?
What's new in Xamarin? They have Xamarin, well, obviously the open source stuff that they released last year when Microsoft bought them. And they have this whole roadmap out there called Xamarin Evolution, which you can find on the forums, and where they're taking community, I would say, recommendations and ideas, and you can not vote on them, but talk about them. So we're sort of like GitHub issues.
Okay.
And see what they're going to work on next and contribute yourself. And if you go over to the GitHub on the open source.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
You'll put a link to that in the show notes. I think that's really interesting. I think one of the big things is Xamarin Forms. Came out a couple of years ago, but what is Xamarin Forms?
Xamarin Forms is a way to write your UI once, so to speak. It has you still have the shared backend with C#, and now you have a shared front end as well, so to speak. And it has being written in XAML or written in C#. And what it does, it abstracts the UI to the common parts of Android, UWP, or iOS. So you don't have necessarily the full access to each operating system, but you have the individual access to the common parts such as a label or a button or things such as a picker view.
Okay, so if I create it in XAML, then is there a preview mode? Do I see it on the screen and how it's going to look?
Right.
And how's that going to look? Because when it renders, it probably looks a little bit different on an iPhone than it does on Android, than it does on a Windows device.
Right. It still is completely native.
Okay.
So once you get a pure iOS app or you get a pure Android app.
Okay.
And in the last, I think, 2 versions of Xamarin Studio and Visual Studio, and it probably went to 1.0 very recently, is the XAML Previewer.
Okay.
And where you can actually build the app, build the XAML, and preview it without actually running the app, which helps the debug cycle, so you're not actually deploying to the simulator and seeing everything. So.
Okay. Well, when it previews, does it preview in multiple? Are there multiple previews then?
You can add the preview in iOS, and then there's a button there where you can switch over to Android.
I see. Okay.
And you can preview landscape or.
Now, I noticed when you said you write your UI once, you added more or less. Why did you hedge like that?
Well, more or less because you can still get down into the platform specific parts by writing custom renderers, which I feel Xamarin is kind of moving away from in lieu of effects.
Effects?
Effects are ways to tweak the UI only. So like adding a shadow to a label. So you're not actually affecting the behavior at all.
Okay.
Rather, you're just adding a little effect to the view. And they also have things called native embeddable views. And these are 100% native views that you're adding into the XAML. So like a floating action button in Android. Something that doesn't have an equivalent in iOS.
Oh.
But you can actually put it right into the XAML in your shared Xamarin Forms project, and it works. So it doesn't, when you're compiling for iOS, you don't get any compile errors.
So iOS just ignores it.
iOS just ignores it.
Okay.
And it's a floating action button, completely Android, and you can even bind to it. So the buttons.
So it's a XAML control.
It's essentially a XAML control, but it's an Android control.
Okay, but we add it with the angle brackets that XAML uses.
Yes, it looks just like a XAML control.
All right. Excellent. What's some of the new things that are coming into XAML Forms? I think you said off camera we're on version 2.3 point something.
2.33 is the current version.
Yeah, so it's evolving all the time as they add.
They are
things.
going very quickly.
What's some of the coolest new stuff?
The embeddable native views is the coolest thing that I've been talking about lately in my conference talks. Another thing that they have coming up is the ability to take a Xamarin Forms view, say, and actually go back into a traditional Xamarin iOS app. So you can actually bring the XAML there and put it into a traditional Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android app. So you're not just limited anymore to doing one Forms app or traditional. You can kind of mix and match. And that's coming up. I'm not sure which version they're going to, but they're talking about it. And they're working on a lot of Android speed improvements. That was one knock that you get with the traditional Xamarin approach, or even the Xamarin Forms approach, is that Android's a little bit slower.
You mean the application when it's running is a little bit slower?
Yeah.
Why was that?
That's a good question that I don't know offhand, other than Android's always a special case.
Okay.
But they're going faster now with
All right.
Android.
So they've added some enhancements under the hood. As far as we know, it's magic. We don't care.
Right.
It's faster.
Pulls it under the hat and much faster.
What are some of the features of XAML Forms that you find most useful?
The one that I've been using a lot lately is called behaviors. What a behavior does is it adds additional functionality to a control without you having to subclass the control or writing code in the code behind file. So you can take an entry control and add like a numeric validator to it. So now this entry control only takes numeric entries, and you don't have to subclass it and make a numeric entry control. Rather, you just write a numeric validator, and when it gets attached to the control, it gets the entry control sent into it. You attach it on the text changing event, and then that's where you do your validation.
Okay.
And so the control itself has a behaviors collection, and so you can actually add multiple to it at a time.
Oh, interesting. So this is all done declaratively. One control is bound to another control or connected to another control, I should say?
The behaviors can be connected together, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you find yourself writing less code, I think, as time goes on.
Those are reusable, exactly. So you can put them in their own DLL essentially and bring them in. And
Interesting. How about on the UI side? What's going on there?
I've been finding myself using styles a lot, which are akin to CSS styles in the HTML web world.
Okay.
But one of the things that I really like is that the styles that you can start theming your apps with them. And so what that would mean is that you can have, let's say, your entire page themed out or styled out, where you have labels a certain color, your entry views a little bit over from the labels and such, and they're all attached to one style. But using this dynamic resource keyword, you can actually switch all the styles at once at runtime. And then what you're going to essentially get is a completely different looking app.
Oh.
Just by some event, whether the user wants to change it in the settings or something happened, such as they went down and downloaded something so you can get the user's attention that there's a brand new.
So without this, if I can paraphrase that, we'd essentially, when the page loads or the activity loads, whatever, when the view loads, without dynamic styles, you would have to set those at the beginning, and then they were what they were.
Right.
But now we can change them on the fly.
Right. Dynamic styles, right. So before, styles were static.
Right.
So if you styled, let's say, in a list view, you styled a cell, it looked the same all the time. But with dynamic styles, you can actually change out the way the cell looks.
Excellent.
And there's another thing called data template selectors, where your list view can actually have a cell that's completely different than the other cells within it. So it'll be calling an attention to a cell. And my examples of that I've been using in my talks is a recipe manager app. And so you have basic recipes, and then a recommended recipe, which stands out from the rest as being something special. And that has a completely different look than the rest of the recipes in that list view.
Oh, very cool. So it sounds like there's a lot of exciting things happening in the Xamarin space right now. It's just going faster and faster.
Yes, definitely, and it's.
Where can people learn more about Xamarin and Xamarin Forms?
I've been keeping up with my blog, codemailtech.com.
Okay.
Just released a Pluralsight course called Moving Beyond the Basics of Xamarin Forms.
That's out now?
It's out now. Came out in late
Excellent.
February. And I'm always going out to the Xamarin site itself, which the documentation there is excellent.
All right, great. And you're on Twitter too, right?
I'm on Twitter at CodemailMatt. CodemailMatt.
Matt, thanks a lot.
Thank you, David. The best thing I like about technology is that when it gets really loud in here, you have all the friends giving you the support and thumbs up that you can do it.